built with AI. Kicking us off, we have Ivanna Kaceviča. Ivanna will show us how to build GenAI apps fast with Firebase and our lovely Flutter. Working throughout building a functional GenAI-powered Flutter app using Firebase and the GenKit toolkit without getting bogged down in heavy ML theory. Perfect for practical application. So let's start.
Okay, yes, let's start. So welcome everyone to my presentation today that will be about Gen AI apps with Flutter development. And my name is Ivanna. I am from Riga, Latvia. I have been working with Flutter since around 2020, and currently I am a lead software developer at a company called LMT. And just in case someone is lost, this is not a talk about vibe coding or how to write Flutter apps with AI. And instead, this will be a talk about how you can add AI features to your existing Flutter apps. So imagine this situation. Your boss comes up to you and says, hey, let's add AI to our app, because apparently all the competitors already are ChatGPT wrappers. Everyone added AI, and now we want to do the same. And your boss asks, what's the estimation? And you might not really know the answer to this. So you might say something like, I don't know, 3 months? Great, go ahead. Well, that was easy, right? So let's see if we can actually do that in 3 months. Maybe we can do it faster. So the GenKit is this framework that is developed by Google. And what it does is that it helps developers integrate Gen AI capabilities into their applications. And what exactly is Gen AI? Well, Gen AI is short from generative AI. And with generative AI, we mean everything that can be generated. So you can generate text, you can generate images, video, audio, even code. All of that is Gen AI because it's something that AI model generated for you. And what kind of models you can use in AI or GenKit? Well, GenKit officially supports models like Gemini, Imagen, Claude, and some open models like Gemma or Llama. But there is actually also a community support with plugins that allow you to also plug in things like ChatGPT or Mistral or whatever you prefer that is supported by the community. And I think that's great advantage of using GenKit, that you can use completely different models, and if you want, you can use them together. So how do you actually connect models? Is it even easy to connect them? Well, for that, GenKit has great unified interface, and you can, as I already said, combine them or switch one model to another by just changing the model name. As easy as that. And by the way, this talk is in any way not affiliated by GenKit. This is just my own exploration of this framework. So how do you structure the logic in your app, the AI logic? For that, we will use flows, and we will also use .prompt files to manage your prompts in a convenient way. How do you make your AI responses more accurate, more personalized? Well, GenKit has tool calling or agentic behavior that you probably have heard about from everywhere recently. We have RAG if you want to feed your own data or your own context to the model. So you can use this. And this is optional. I will not be showing this today, but I really recommend you to also check out the UI with GenKit. And this is this web dashboard that will open in your local computer and will allow you to test out your prompts or model config before you deploy it to quickly see some results. So I really recommend checking that out separately. Now, most importantly, the question that we as Flutter developers or front-end developers ask is, how do I actually deploy this? Because some of us, and many of us, are not extremely familiar with the backend, and me included. So we have actually 3 options to do this. Number 1, we can use Cloud Functions for Firebase. Number 2, you can use HTTPS endpoints and just call them from whatever. And number 3, if you are familiar with Node.js, you can actually deploy this to pretty much any Node.js platform. And because I myself am a mobile front-end developer working primarily with Flutter, I will use option number 1, because in Flutter we have a package for Firebase functions that allows us to just easily plug them into our app and call the functions with a very simple call that I will show you today. So this is how the app will look architecture-wise. You have your Flutter frontend that is written with Dart, and that will communicate with a callable cloud function that we will actually use TypeScript for, but don't be afraid of TypeScript. It's not a big deal if you follow the official examples. And that TypeScript callable functions, they will engage with the actual GenKit framework where your AI flows live and exist. For the final app, I will be building this AI-powered greeting card generator. This is how the input page looks. And by the way, this is a web app in Flutter because it was just easier to deploy it actually than a mobile, but you can do the mobile version easily of the same app. So in our input page, we have this name, age, occasion, tone, and additional nodes input. And when we see the output, after all the AI magic happened, first we see this AI generated image that is customized for the input that you have entered. And secondly, we see the AI generated text that was also generated with using GenKit. Now for the app, the architecture is broken down to this. You have your input page, that is a Dart file, front end. We have an output page, also the front end part. And to connect them, we will need to use some business logic. And if you are a Flutter developer, you know that we call business logic approaches state management in Flutter. So we will need some state management to connect input page, output page with the business logic component. And that business logic component then will communicate with the cloud using the functions. So it will call the functions on the cloud. It will connect with our index.ts, which is a TypeScript file on our backend. And on the backend, we will invoke our GenKit AI flows. That's the plan. Now, before we start, you will need a couple of things. First, we need Firebase for your project. And not only just simple Firebase, but actually you will need to enable the Blaze plan. And why do we need that is because we will use Vertex AI API to use Imagen, image model, and that's why you need to select Blaze. Another thing that you need is an API key for the model that you will be using. I will be using Gemini. You can use ChatGPT or whatever different model that you prefer. Normally, you will need an API key to do that. So I have created mine in the AI Studio, google.com, and you will need to store it securely, which we will discuss in a second. Next, from your Firebase project, you can always open Google Cloud project for the same application. And in the Google Cloud, you will need to enable 2 things. Number 1, Secret Manager API, and that's for the storing your API key securely. I will show you in the next slide how will you do that. And number 2, as I mentioned, we need Vertex AI to actually access the Imagen model. So you will need to enable also that. Just click enable and you're done. Next up, in your secret manager, all you need to do is to create one new secret. Call it Google Gen AI API key or whatever name you prefer. Just make sure to store that name and remember it because you will need that later. And insert your secret value, which is API key, the actual key, and then just save it. And this, of course, is needed for the security because you should never, ever, ever store your API keys in your Git or hard code them in your files, because then they can be stolen and violated. So this is a better way. Next, you will need some authentication. Again, for a layer of security, because we are using some paid services. We don't want our app to be compromised. So we will need some authentication. And in my case, the app is just a simple prototype. So anonymous is fine with me. But I have to warn you that for some enterprise level, for production apps, of course, my advice would be to use something stronger like social network authentication like Google or Apple, or maybe email with password. And another thing that you would need to enable in a production app is app check. That is also a service by Firebase that would allow even more security for your function calls. Okay, so if you want to follow along or if you want to later do the steps that we will discuss on your own, I have a starter app prepared for you. You can download it using the QR code right here. And when you clone the starter branch, you will need to run Flutter pub-get and Flutter Fire configure because, of course, you will need to connect this starter app with your own Firebase project ID. On top of that, you also need to have Flutter on your machine, Firebase CLI to run some Firebase commands, and for the backend and functions, you will need Node.js and NPM. All of these are quite straightforward to install, so I will not spend a lot of time describing how to do so. You can find it easily online. Just make sure you have all of these tools on your computer. Okay, so let's go to the actual implementation part. Remember, this is how the final app should look. We have our input with some form, name, age, occasion, tone, and optional additional notes. And as an output, we want to see AI-generated image based on the input and AI-generated greeting text based on our input. So let's start from the front end. If you download the starter app, the UI is already implemented for you, but we need to somehow connect our input page with the output page. And in my case, I will be using change notifier. And in this controller that uses change notifier, I will simply store greeting text, greeting image. If there is an error, I can also store error text. I can get the loading state, and I have the generate greeting method that will actually communicate with my backend, with my functions, and somehow have to trigger those functions. So the next thing that I will need to add after this controller is the actual function service. So once again, the controller generate greeting is invoked. Then we will have some functions service. And I already mentioned that in Flutter, we have a package that allows us to easily call them. So to call your backend function, all you need is to know its name, and you will have a method HTTPS callable where you can pass function name as a parameter, and that's all you need to do. Then you will get your result, which can be a text, some bytes, maybe a JSON object, or whatever you defined in your Cloud Functions. So for my greeting text, the function will be called generate greeting text function, and I will do absolutely the same for my image. I will use HTTPS callable and just pass my image generation function name. And you remember on our input page, we also have a button that is called generate, and that button will trigger this submit form method. So here we will create an object where we can store everything that our user has input in the form, which is again name, age, occasion, tone, and some additional notes. And then we will call controller generate greeting with that input. And on the output page, to get the actual results, we will use a listenable builder that is a perfect pair to change notifier, and it will listen to our greeting controller. It will show the loading state on the output page. If an error occurred, it will show the error state. And if everything went well, it will show the actual image and the text. So once again, in the input page, we press generate. This button triggers controller. Controller will call functions, and the functions will call the backend. So how do we actually implement the backend part? So far, as Flutter developers, we see the straightforward front-end implementation, but what about those scary TypeScript files? How do we do those? Well, they are not as scary as you might think. You just need to initialize Firebase functions first, running this Firebase init functions command. And then for this particular tutorial, I will also ask you to install two more dependencies. Number one, from GenKit AI, we will install .prompt. And this is a library that will allow us to store our prompt files separately using this .prompt notation. I will show you in a minute how that will look. And the second dependency that we will need to install from GenKit AI is Vertex AI. We already said that we will need that to use Imagen. So after you initialize your functions, Firebase will create some files for you. And your main file where you need to make changes is called index.ts. In this file, we will import all the dependencies that we plan to use. And then remember, we have created a secret on the Google Cloud when I said you should also save the name for the secret. So here is where you need to remember that name, because in this TypeScript file, you will actually define your API key using that secret name. And then one thing that is left to actually configure the GenKit instance is to simply assign it to a variable, say GenKit, which plugins you plan to use. In our case, it's Google AI and Vertex AI, and what is the default model that you plan to use in case no model was specified. So far, so good. Now, about the .prompt notation, it's a tool that allows you to store your prompts not just as strings in your code, but as a separate files where you can not only save the prompt itself, but also what model should be called, what is the input for this call to the LLM in this case, and then the actual prompt. And you can also see here that this .prompt file also supports conditionals. Like if additional nodes are provided, then do include additional context in the prompt. Otherwise, this will be skipped, which is also super convenient. Now, about the image, there are a couple of options on how this whole image generation flow could be implemented, and I will use a two-step approach. So, sometimes when we want to generate images with AI, first thing which we might do is not actually write the prompt, but ask another AI to help us to generate the prompt, because LLMs are good at crafting this really good prompt where the subject and background and everything is specified. So in this example, I'm asking ChatGPT, help me create an image generation prompt for a birthday greeting card. And then ChatGPT will reply something like this, depending on what I asked for. So this prompt will definitely be a higher quality than the one I would come up with myself. That's why the two-step process. And then I would copy over this prompt and use it in some image generation tool of choice. In this case, I am showing the Midjourney example. So I just copied that over to Midjourney, and that was the greeting card that I got. This flow right here with two steps is exactly what we will be using in our app, just with different models. And if you want to use ChatGPT, you can also use that actually in the GenKit, as I already mentioned. So for the image.prompt file, I am not asking the model to generate the image right away. I am asking to generate a prompt for generating greeting card, just as I show you. So this output will be a text. Now, one thing that I also want to mention, especially if you're not that familiar with TypeScript, is a tool called Zod. Zod is a schema declaration library that we will be using. And what is a schema? Well, that's data type. It can be a string, it can be an object, a number, whatever data type is a schema. So in our case, for the input, we will define a schema that has name, age, occasion, tone, and additional nodes. And how will we do that? We will use import z from GenKit, which is Zod, and we will just define our greeting schema as z.object, where we can show what we will be using, our parameters, and also you can say if they are nullable, optional, or maybe they have some default values as well. You can use also that. Okay, so I already mentioned the word flow a couple of times. Now I want to specify what I mean with the GenKit flow. The flow allows you to organize all this AI magic, AI features in your app in one kind of method. So you can define the input that it takes. You can gather context. Sometimes it's needed when you are working on a chat application or something similar, or you need some RAG. You can chain multiple models together, and this is exactly what we need in our image generation flow. You can evaluate the output if you need to, and return, of course, the final result. So think about it as a function or a method that takes in the input, returns the result, and in the middle, the AI work happens. So for the greeting text, the flow is very simple. We already have our greeting prompt. We will feed that to AI model, and we will return the greeting text. As simple as that. For the image flow, two steps. First, feed our image.prompt to AI model and get the text. When the text is ready, feed that text to the image generation model, and finally return the image. Both of these examples are AI flows and are called flows in the GenKit. Okay, how do you actually define a flow? So back to our index.ts file, all the backend work is happening within that one file. We can use AI define flow. You give your flow a name and an input schema. We already defined that one before. An output schema that in this case for a greeting text will be just a string, and then the actual logic. So in this case, we will use our .prompt file called greeting, and AI will understand what to do with that, because that already contains all the information, and it will return you the text. So the only question left is, how do you call it? How do we call this from our front end? Very simple. We have our cloud functions. So you just wrap it up in this on-call GenKit, pass your secrets, which in our case is Google AI API key, define some else policy, which in my case is user signed in. And this method is already implemented for you in GenKit. You don't have to implement it yourself. Just say is signed in. And of course, the name of the flow that you just defined. And after you deploy this, you can just call this function and you will get your result. That's it for the greeting text. But what about the image? So for image, again, AI define flow, give it a name, give it an input schema, and the logic here will be a bit more complicated because of those two steps. So step number 1, we will generate the prompt for the image. Step number 2, we will feed that prompt to Imagen. In this case, I'm using Imagen 3 Fast, and we will return the media. So the question again, how do you call it? How can we call this? Absolutely the same as before. Wrap this up in on-call GenKit, use your secret, use aus policy, and use correct name. After you deploy this, your function will be ready to call. Okay, so far so good. Now, of course, you have been promoted to be the head of AI department because of so much hard work on the front end and the back end. So let's see if we can actually deploy all of this. Let me just quickly switch over to my Android Studio and run one command. So I will say Firebase deploy only functions. And I will wait a bit. If the font is quite small on your screen, I just opened my terminal and said Firebase deploy only functions. And here is my index.ts file. And by the way, yes, I use light theme in my IDE. So now some stuff is going on. Firebase is working on deploying my functions. I can see some output in the console about what is happening. Hopefully there will be no errors, but who knows? And meanwhile, I will already try to run my web app to save us some time while we wait for the deployment. It might take a while. Normally, it's like a minute or two. Nothing too dramatic. Let's see if I have, yeah. Okay, so this is how my input page looks. Before I try that out, I want to wait for my backend to be fully deployed. So let's just be patient and wait. We can see that we have generate greeting text function and generate greeting image function, which I just showed you in my slides is this name that we gave to the function that uses the flow. if we have some questions in the chat, maybe now it's a good time that I answer them while we wait, but I'm not sure because I don't see anything but my screen.
I check chat always. For now, I haven't questions.
Okay, perfect. So
waiting until
now we have successful create operation. I think it's not still the end. Let's wait a bit more. Yeah, it has created the greeting text function. I have to say it's a bit slow today. I have tried that a bunch of times before. This is probably the slowest. Not sure why. But yeah, if you have any questions, please write them down in the chat so we can discuss them while we wait. Yes, so deploy is complete. Now let's give it a test drive. So I want to create a greeting card, right? Now my cloud function should be deployed. So let's see, my friend's name is Anna. And I want to congratulate her on new job. And her new job is Flutter developer. Let's see if we can get something nice. Okay, so now the cloud work is happening. GenKit is working. By the way, about the errors. Oh yeah, see, dearest Anna, wishing you the very best on your exciting new journey as a Flutter developer. So happy for you and can't wait to see the amazing things you create. And for some reason, we have a butterfly. I think that's because of the word Flutter. And the wings have some code on them. How cute is this? And you can create unique greeting cards to your friends and family using GenKit and an app like this. And the thing I wanted to mention about the errors is that sometimes Imagen will flag your prompt as unsafe, and that's when you would see the actual error state. I have noticed that a couple of times, but most of the times this is working correctly. So yeah, I also want to show you my last slide, which is the link to the tutorial article, because you can follow this also as a text tutorial. And if you can leave me some feedback, that would absolutely make my day. Just go ahead and leave me some comments if you have some. Here are my socials, and thank you so much for watching this presentation today.